Father Davis's solemn voice echoed through the church. In sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, will you love him, honor him, and protect him until death do you part. I looked at Sophia Taylor standing before me in her holy wedding gown. She was as beautiful as a painting, but as cold as ice. In my previous life, we were entangled for a full 50 years. From a young man who had nothing to the richest person in Seattle, controlling a $50 billion commercial empire. I gave her everything I could: wealth, status, endless indulgence, and love. But even when the two of us were lying side by side in hospital beds, our lives ebbing away, she never once said to me, "I love you." The last thing she left me was a poisoned regret. Ethan, the greatest regret of my life is that I couldn't marry Liam. If you truly love me in the next life, please make it happen for us. Liam Parker, her unattainable white moon, the one she loved but could never have. For him, she gave me the cold shoulder, moved out, and even at our ocean-wide group listing celebration banquet, just because of one despondent phone call from him, she abandoned all the guests and drove 1,000 miles to that city to comfort him. I spent 50 years and still couldn't warm her heart. Now, at her dying request, we really came back to our wedding scene 50 years ago. I was about to say the words that once left me with no regrets. I do. But Sophia suddenly lifted her head. The bewilderment of newlyweds was gone from her eyes, replaced by a sharpness that saw through everything and disgust. I knew she had been reborn too. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice low but loud enough for nearby relatives and friends to hear, "let's break up." The church fell utterly silent. All eyes were fixed on me, full of shock, sympathy, and schadenfreude. My father-in-law, Sophia's father Robert Taylor, rose with an ashen face, about to explode. I raised my hand, signaling him to stay calm. I looked at Sophia. Her face wore a cruel satisfaction, as if she were waiting for me to break down, beg, and, like in a last life, cling to her in humiliation. But she was disappointed. I calmly unpinned the corsage on my chest and tossed it to the floor, my voice without a trace of emotion. "Fine." One word made all the prepared retorts Sophia had ready stick in her throat. For the first time, genuine astonishment showed in those beautiful eyes of hers. What did you say?" "All right," I repeated, even giving her a small smile. "Since you've decided, I'll let you have it. After all, a forced melon isn't sweet." Father Davis stood awkwardly in place, at a loss. The guests began whispering among themselves, and the scene briefly spiraled out of control. Sophia's mother, Margaret Taylor, rushed over, grabbed her hand, and lowered her voice as she scolded, "Sophia, are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing?" "I'm well aware of what I'm doing." Sophia shrugged her mother's hand off, her gaze fixed on me as if trying to find even the slightest trace of pain beneath my calm facade. "Ethan, stop pretending. Do you think this will make me change my mind? Let me tell you, it's impossible. The person I love has never been you." Her words were like a sharp knife, precisely stabbing at the heart I had in my previous life. But now that heart had long since been replaced, its core hardened like iron. I ignored her hysterics and instead turned to the dumbfounded parents on both sides, bowing slightly. "Dad, Mom, Uncle Robert, Aunt Margaret, I'm sorry, today's wedding is canceled." After saying that, I turned and left, without a trace of reluctance. Stepping out of the church doors, the sunlight was blinding. I took a deep breath. The heaviness and resentment that had built up in my chest over 50 years vanished in an instant. All the things from my past life clung to me like maggots on bone, tormenting me for half my life. I remember the eve of Oceanwide Group's IPO. For a critical partnership, I went 3 days and nights without sleep, drank until I had a gastric bleed at the banquet, and the first thing I wanted to do after signing the contract was call her to share the joy. On the other end of the line was her cold voice. "I'm with Liam. He's in a bad mood. Don't bother me unless it's important." I remember my 50th birthday. I had booked Seattle's finest hotel and invited all the business elites. She, as the hostess, vanished midway through the banquet. Only later did I learn that Liam's exhibition wasn't selling, so she paid out of her own pocket to buy every painting and spent the night drinking red wine with him in the gallery. The next day, the entire Seattle high society was mocking me, Ethan Johnson, as a cuckolded weakling. I used my dignity, my wealth, even my life to love a woman who would never love me back. I thought love was sacrifice, was letting go. But only when she said, "Let go," on her deathbed, did I understand that my love, to her, was nothing more than the shackle and prison blocking her from rushing toward her true love. My efforts were worthless in her eyes. Now, I have been reborn. Sophia, since you want freedom so badly want to fly together with your Liam. Fine, I'll make it happen for you. But this time, you'll be the one to pay the price. My phone rang. It was a call from Sophia. I hung up without hesitation. Then the text messages started flooding in. "Ethan, come back to me. Let's make things clear. Do you think leaving makes it over? What you owe me? How do you plan to repay it? You coward. What else do you know how to do besides run away?" I looked at those messages, a cold smile curling at the corner of my mouth. Oh, her. In the previous life, she married me right after graduation, never lifting a finger. I built everything from nothing, turning a tiny renovation crew into the ocean-wide group, valued at $50 billion US. As my wife, she enjoyed the fruits of my labor. Designer bags, luxury cars and villas, a private jet. I gave her everything a woman could dream of. And what did she ever do for me? Oh, right, she gave me a child. But when the child was 3, because Liam got drunk after a breakup, she left the feverish child to take care of him, causing the child's pneumonia to worsen and nearly costing his life. From then on, I kept her away from the child. In this life, since the wedding was canceled, our child naturally will no longer have the chance to come into this world. Perhaps, for that child, this is also a kind of blessing. I took a taxi back to what had been our marriage home, a large flat in the city center, with the deed showing only my name. As soon as I walked in, Sophia and her parents and Liam were blocking the doorway. Liam wore a faded denim jacket, his hair a little long, giving off a bit of an artist dissolute vibe. When he saw me, his expression showed unabashed provocation and smugness. In the previous life, it was precisely that the whole world owes me look that won Sophia 50 years of her sympathy and love. "Ethan, you finally show your face." Sophia stood with her arms folded like an arrogant queen. "You ruined the wedding. You've completely humiliated the Taylor family. So tell me, what are you going to do about it?" Her skill at crying wolf was as practiced as ever. I slipped on my slippers and walked straight to the sofa in the living room, poured myself a glass of water, and completely ignored their presence. Sophia's father, Robert Taylor, trembled with anger. "Ethan, what kind of attitude is that? Sophia has already said she won't marry you. We're here today to talk about compensation." Compensation? I finally lifted my eyelids and looked at them, as if watching a clumsy farce. "What do I owe you compensation for?" "You," Sophia cut in. "Ethan, we've been together for 3 years. I gave you the best years of my youth, and now you want to walk away. So you married me, so I could provide you with a comfortable life, right? Now that you won't marry me, the deal is off, and we owe each other nothing," I said flatly. Sophia's face flushed red and then turned pale. She hadn't expected that the man who once obeyed her every word would now dare to humiliate her with such blunt remarks. "You're lying," she screamed. "I love you. Love me." I laughed. "Love the person next to you?" I turned my gaze to Liam, who had remained silent but was holding Sophia's shoulder in a victor's pose. Liam met my gaze and lifted the corner of his mouth. "Ethan, since Sophia has already made her choice, you, as a man, should be magnanimous. You can't force matters of the heart." "Magnanimous?" I stood up slowly and walked over to them. I'm half a head taller than Liam. The aura I've developed from years in a high position made him instinctively take a step back. "Liam, I remember you graduated from Seattle School of Art and have always wanted to open a gallery, right?" I asked. Liam was stunned for a moment, then straightened his chest. "So what if it is?" "Nothing. I took out a checkbook, a habit I'd formed in my past life. I'll give you a chance. Leave Sophia, and I'll give you $5 million, enough for you to open a decent gallery and live the rest of your life in peace." In my previous life, I had considered buying him off. But back then Sophia cried to me, "Ethan, this is insulting me. You're also insulting Liam. Our relationship cannot be measured by money." I had no choice but to give up, so as not to make her sad. And now, I intend to measure her so-called sacred love with money right in front of her. Liam's breathing noticeably quickened. $5 million. In that era, for a poor student who had graduated only a few years before, it was undoubtedly an astronomical sum. A flash of greed crossed his eyes, but he quickly masked it again. He glanced at Sophia. Her expression had already reached the extreme of unpleasantness. Ethan, do you think you could buy me with money? The person I love is Sophia, not your money. Liam refused righteously, while not forgetting to look at Sophia with deep affection. Sophia's expression cleared slightly. She looked back at him, moved. Oh, I nodded, tore up the check, and in front of them, slowly ripped it to pieces. At least you have some backbone. Then I looked at Sophia. You've seen it too. I've done everything I can. Now, please leave my house. My house. Sophia snapped. Ethan, don't forget. The seed money for your startup came from my father. You owe me half of this house. At last, the truth revealed itself. This is their real purpose for coming today. Seed money. I chuckled softly. Uncle Robert, when you lent me $50,000 back then, I paid you back $100,000 the next year. Do you need me to pull up the bank transfer records to show you? Robert Taylor's face instantly flushed the color of raw liver. Of course he remembered. Back then he looked down on me as a poor kid. If Sophia hadn't insisted on marrying me, he wouldn't have lent even that $50,000. As for this apartment, I took the property deed from the drawer and slapped it on the table. The down payment, the monthly mortgage, every penny was earned by me. It's written in black and white. Only my name, Ethan Johnson, is on it. You want it? Fine. Swimming court. I methodically tore up the last shred of their illusions. Sophia's mother, Margaret Taylor, shrieked. Ethan, you are heartless. Sophia has been with you for 3 years, and you treat her like this? Have you no conscience? Aunt Margaret, speak with evidence, I said coldly, looking at her. During these 3 years, Sophia's food, clothing, and expenses here have all been the best. The bags, jewelry, clothes I bought her surely add up to well over $100,000, right? Who actually benefited? Let's do the math. Besides, I haven't even held you accountable for tricking us into marriage. Backing out on the wedding day shamed the Johnson family. How do you intend to pay that debt? Every word I said made their expressions darker. They obviously hadn't expected that I, who had always complied with them, would become so petty, so cold and merciless. Sophia trembled with fury, pointing at my nose. Ethan, just you wait. You'll regret this. I'm waiting. I made a please gesture. The door's that way, no seeing you out. The group slunk away. Liam, before leaving, turned back and gave me a venomous look. I knew it wasn't because I was heartless toward Sophia, but because of the $5 million check I had torn up. A person who values pride and love above money would not show that kind of covetous, greedy look upon seeing $5 million. He refuses only because he wants more. And Sophia is his greatest bargaining chip. In my past life, I didn't understand. In this life, I see through it. After things quieted down, I began to replay my life. In 1998, I was 25 and had a falling out with Sophia at our wedding. All I had besides this apartment was a fledgling renovation company with only a dozen or so employees, the precursor to Oceanwide Group. And at that time, Sophia was starting over as well. She knew Oceanwide Group would become a commercial empire worth $50 billion in market value. So she called off the wedding, but she would never let go of that juicy piece so easily. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I received a summons from the court. Sophia sued me, demanding division of the joint property from our cohabitation period. Her demand was clear. She didn't want the house. She didn't want cash. She only wanted half the equity of my renovation company. Her calculations were clicking loudly. In a last life, it was by relying on the original shares of Oceanwide Group that, even after years of separation from me, she still lived a life of profligacy. In this life, she wanted to pull the same trick again and imagine an even more perfect outcome. If she were to get half the company's equity with her and Liam's methods, they would inevitably find ways to push me out and take the whole company for themselves. By then, I, Ethan Johnson, would have nothing. And she, Sophia Taylor, would take my empire and, together with her true love, Liam Parker, ascend to the peak of life. I have to admit, the plan is perfect. It's a pity that the person she faced was me, reborn as well. The day I received the court summons, I called my lawyer, Mr. Carter. Then I contacted Sophia proactively. We arranged to meet at a cafe. She was still that same haughty self, as if she had me figured out. Have you come to terms? She stirred the coffee in her cup, too lazy to lift her eyelids. I accept your terms. I got straight to the point. Sophia snapped her head up, her eyes full of disbelief, which quickly turned to ecstatic joy. Are you serious? Serious, I nodded. You can have the company, but I have one condition. What condition? She watched me warily. The company still has some debts, about $200,000. Since you want the company, you'll have to take on the debts as well, I said calmly. This was actually the first trap I set. The company did have debt, but far more than $200,000. Because of one stall project, I was burdened with nearly $800,000 in debt. In 1998, that was enough to crush any small business. In my last life, to pay that off, I worked day and night, nearly costing me my life. Sophia didn't know any of this. In her reborn memories, my company had been smooth sailing and rising to the top from the very beginning. She thought the $200,000 I mentioned was just a casually mentioned little problem. All right, I agree. She barely hesitated. But we need a contract, written in black and white, stating that 100% of the company's equity belongs to me. She was afraid I would go back on my word, or only give her half. Fine. I nodded. Seeing the uncontrollable joy and greed on her face, I felt nothing but coldness inside. She abandoned even the most basic investigation and thought just to get my company. In the last life, she scorned me for being obsessed with money. In this life, she couldn't wait to jump into the pit I had dug just for cash. How ironic. Before long, under the witness of lawyer Mr. Carter, we signed the equity transfer agreement. I transferred that renovation company called Salloway Decoration Company, Chihong, Jiangsu, Gengsu, along with all its assets and liabilities, entirely to Sophia. The moment she received the agreement, Sophia and Liam, standing behind her, exchanged a smile. That smile was full of mockery toward me and boundless longing for the future. They thought they had won that enormous business empire of the future. They even, on purpose, put on a passionate kissing show right in front of me as they walked out of the law firm. Liam held Sophia in his arms and mouthed to me, "Thank you, Mr. Johnson." I smiled and said nothing. Sophia, Liam, the game has only just begun. The first thing Sophia did after taking over the company was rename it Sophia and Liam Decoration, Weijue Zhangshi. Naming it after her, and Liam announced to the world that the company now belonged to them. Immediately after, she appointed Liam, who had no management experience, as the company's general manager, giving him full responsibility for operations. The first thing they were going to do was replicate the success trajectory of my previous life. I remember very clearly that the first turning point in Salloway Decoration Company's rise was securing all the full decoration contract for Seattle's newly developed Blue Bay community. This project earned me my first bucket of gold and made Salloway famous in Seattle's industry overnight. In Sophia's memory, this project was a sure win. So when the developer of Blue Bay community opened the public tender, Sophia and Liam Decoration did not hesitate to submit a bid, and to ensure nothing went wrong, they pushed the quote down to an almost non-existent profit margin. They succeeded. Sophia and Liam, in the posture of victors, held a celebration at the company. It was said that at the meeting, Liam proudly announced that Sophia and Liam Decoration was about to take off and would become an industry benchmark for Seattle and even the whole country. At that moment, I was holding the just over $1 million in cash I'd gotten from selling the company in a house, drinking with the village committee secretary, Mr. Wilson, on a desolate patch of alkali soil in the most inconspicuous west suburb of Seattle. "Mr. Johnson, are you really going to lease this land of ours?" Mr. Wilson's face was flushed from drink and his tongue a little thick. "This is all alkaline soil. Nothing grows here, and even building houses is risky because the foundations aren't stable. What do you want to rent it for?" A man from the mountains has his own clever plans. I topped off his glass and smiled. "Mr. Wilson, we signed a contract, remember? 50-year lease, rent paid in full up front. For those 50 years, this land is mine to use." That's right. It's on paper in black and white. How could it be fake?" Mr. Wilson grinned from ear to ear. "This wasteland of over 2,300 mu can bring the village $200,000 in annual rental income. Leased for 50 years, it's practically a windfall fallen from the sky for them." Everyone thought I was crazy, leaving a perfectly good renovation company behind to use all my assets to lease a godforsaken saline alkali land. Even my most capable assistant from my previous life, and the only subordinate I'm still in contact with in this life, Michael Wong, couldn't help but advise me, "Ethan, isn't this risk too great? How about we think it over again?" I patted his shoulder. "Michael, trust me, in less than 3 months, this place will become the hottest spot in all of Seattle. Michael was doubtful, but he chose to believe me. Because only I knew that in a week, the city government would release an outline for the city's development plan. And this barren salt-alkali land in the western suburbs would be designated the Seattle High-Tech Industrial Development Zone, and it would also become the starting point of Seattle's first highway to the inland provinces. In my previous life, I missed this opportunity, because at that time, I was mongda bukakijao over the $800,000 debt and had no time to pay attention to these things. By the time I noticed, this land had already been divided up by several major real estate developers, and I could only nibble on the scraps left by others like the Blue Bay community. In this life, I arranged things in advance and secured this core land that will be priceless in the future. And Sophia and Liam, excitedly, jumped into the first big pit I had prepared for them, Blue Bay community. Sophia and Liam had no idea that the Blue Bay community project, though flashy on the surface, was actually a bottomless pit. In my previous life, the reason I was able to make it work was because I had a life-or-death friendship with the developer CEO. He tipped me off in advance, told me the project's payment cycle would be extremely long, and told me to be prepared to advance funds. Even so, this project nearly broke my cash flow. I barely got through it by resorting to high-interest loans. As for Sophia and Liam, one lacked background, the other had no connections. They only saw my successful outcome, but were completely unaware of the dangers behind it. Their low bid win meant that profit margins had been squeezed to the extreme, and the developer had been replaced by a notorious deadbeat from Seattle who was infamous for using any means necessary. They threw themselves into it, using all the company's working capital and even taking out loans in the company's name to buy materials and recruit workers. The project was underway in full swing, but before long, problems started to emerge. According to the contract, the developer should pay the first progress payment when the project is more than half completed. But the developer shirked and delayed with various excuses and didn't pay a single cent. Suppliers scoured the company's landline with demand calls, and the workers, unable to get their wages, began striking and causing trouble. The company's cash flow broke. At that moment, the previously hidden $800,000 abandoned project debt I had concealed also came due. Creditors came one after another, blocking the doors of Sophia and Liam decoration, so it was impossible to get through. Sophia and Liam were completely panicked. The company in their hands had not become a golden egg-laying hen. Instead, it had turned into a bottomless pit that ravenously swallowed their energy and money. Beset by internal and external troubles, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. I saw them in a news report. On the TV screen, Sophia, abandoning her usual refined elegance, had disheveled hair and a haggard face, surrounded by a group of agitated workers as she shouted herself hoarse, trying to explain something. And Liam, her so-called true love, who fancied himself an artist, cowered behind her like a startled quail. Off-screen, the reporter narrated in a cold voice, Sophia and Liam Decoration Company has been sued by multiple suppliers for overdue project payments and workers' wages. The company's legal representative, Sophia Taylor, has been listed as a dishonest person. I turn off the TV and pour myself a glass of red wine. In just 2 months, they had personally destroyed their beautiful future, even faster than I had anticipated. That afternoon, I received a call from Sophia. Her voice was full of fatigue and hoarseness. Long gone was the haughty manner she once had. "Ethan, can we meet?" "No time." I refused outright. "Please." She had begun to cry on the other end of the line. "Just once last time." I was silent for a moment, then I agreed. I was curious. At this point, what other tricks could she possibly have? The meeting place was still that same cafe. She had lost a lot of weight, her eye sockets sunken, and no matter how expensive the cosmetics, they couldn't hide the exhaustion etched across her face. When she saw me, her eyes were complicated, resentment, unwillingness, but more than that, a helpless plea. "You did this, didn't you?" She stared at me. The mess with Blue Bay community and that suddenly appearing debt. It was all part of your plan. So what if I did? I couldn't be bothered to deny it. Her body shook and tears fell instantly. "Why? Ethan, why are you doing this to me? Even if we can't be husband and wife, you don't have to be so ruthless, do you? I thought you at least loved me." That was the funniest joke I had ever heard. "Love you," I retorted, "when you were wearing a wedding dress, in front of all our friends and family, announcing you were breaking up with me to run off with another man. Why didn't you talk to me about love then?" When you and Liam teamed up, greedily trying to take the company I built from scratch, dreaming of a future where you climb up over me, why didn't you talk to me about love? Sophia, stop tossing the word love around. You have sullied that word. My words were like a knife, tearing away her last shred of modesty. Her face went deathly pale, her lips trembling, unable to speak. After a long while, she finally squeezed out between her teeth, "What exactly do you want?" "I don't want anything." I picked up the coffee and blew on the steam. "Just watching a show. From the looks of it, this show is pretty entertaining." "Ethan," she shot to her feet, hands braced on the table, leaning forward as if about to throw herself at me. "You win. I give up. Please, please spare us." She began to cry and lament. She cried about how she had spent the past 2 months, cried about how useless and cowardly Liam was, cried about how she had been driven to despair. "I don't want the company anymore. I'll get it back to you. I don't want anything. Just please, step forward and solve this mess," she pleaded. "For the sake of the 3 years we had." "Affection," I interrupted her. "Our bond was wiped out the moment you called off the engagement. As for the company, a debt-ridden mess entangled in lawsuits. I wouldn't take it even if it were given to me for free." I stood up, preparing to leave. "Don't go." She grabbed my sleeve, her posture humbled to the dust. "Ethan, I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. I shouldn't have been possessed. I shouldn't have listened to Liam's." She began to shift all the blame onto Liam. "It was him. He egged me on. He said your company would be worth tens of billions in the future. He said that if we got the company, we never have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of our lives. He lied to me." Looking at her like that made me feel nauseous. Who was it that swore on the wedding day they loved Liam? Who was it that went against the whole world for him? Now that something's happened, he's been made the scapegoat. As expected, spouses are like birds in the same forest. When disaster strikes, each flies away on their own. Besides, they're not even married. "This is your business, not mine." I pulled my hand away from hers. She staggered back 2 steps, collided with the corner of the table, and spilled coffee all over herself. Embarrassed and disheveled. "Ethan," she shouted, as if grasping at a last straw. "I know a secret, a huge secret about Seattle's future development. If you help me, I'll tell you." I stopped in my tracks and looked back at her. I was curious what secret could be in her head, which held nothing but love affairs and wealth and glory. A flash of hope crossed her eyes as she lowered her voice and said, "It's the west suburb. The government is about to develop that patch of saline alkali land in the west. Land prices, they're dirt cheap right now, like giving it away. If we buy now and sell later, we'll make hundreds of times the profit." She thought this was her only card to turn the tables. She thought this was a world-shattering secret known only to her, the Reborn one. She looked at me full of expectation, waiting for me to show shock and ecstatic joy. Then I laughed. I laughed loudly, rocking back and forth. Her expression, in the wake of my laughter, grew stiff little by little, turned deathly pale. "What are you laughing at?" I stopped laughing, looked at her as one looks at a pitiable, buffoonish little clown. "Sophia, do you think you're the only protagonist in this world?" I took a document out of my pocket and threw it onto the table in front of her. "Take a good look." It was a photocopy of a land lease contract. On it was written clearly, "Let's see, Ethan Johnson. Leased land, Seattle West Suburb, Saline Land. Leased area, 2,300 mil. Lease term, 50 years. The date at the bottom was 2 months ago, which was the day after we signed the company transfer agreement. Sophia's eyes were fixed on that contract. Her pupils shrunk to pinpoints from extreme shock and fear. Her breathing quickened, and her body began to tremble uncontrollably. "No, impossible, this can't be," she murmured. "How could you know? How could you?" "I know far more than you imagine." I looked down at her and spoke slowly, word by word. "In your eyes, I'm just a pitiful stepping stone you abandoned. But in my eyes, you and your so-called true love are merely 2 pawns I toy with at will. You think taking my company stole my future? Wrong. I merely tossed a piece of garbage I never wanted onto you. You think uncovering the West Suburb development secret gave you the key to turn things around? Wrong. The moment I acquired that land, there was no longer a place for you at the table. Sophia, you've always been nothing but a joke." The final sentence completely crushed her. She slumped into the chair, her face ashen, eyes hollow, as if all her spirit had been drained away. In that moment, I finally understood. The cruelest revenge against someone like Sophia isn't to leave her with nothing. It's to make her see clearly that everything she schemed for, betraying and hurting others without hesitation, was nothing more than trash that others scorn. And what she gave up was the treasure she could never reach. I turned and walked away, never looking back. 1 week later, the Seattle city government held a press conference and officially announced the establishment of the Seattle High-Tech Industrial Development Zone and the launch of the Coastal Highway project. Land prices in the western suburbs skyrocketed overnight by 1,000-fold. I, Ethan Johnson, with these more than 2,300 acres of land in hand, suddenly became the most sought-after new tycoon in all of Seattle. I founded a new company named Rising Sun Capital, and countless investors brandished their checks and wore out the threshold of my office. Meanwhile, Sophia and Liam Decoration officially declared bankruptcy and liquidation amid endless lawsuits and debts. All of Sophia's assets, including her parents' house, were forcibly seized by the court to repay debts. She and her family, overnight, went from a well-off household with no worries about food or clothing to destitute people living on the streets. After the company went bankrupt, Liam disappeared immediately. They say he absconded with the last of Sophia's cash and ran off to the south. Sophia's once-in-a-lifetime love ultimately ended in a farce that left both her and her fortune empty-handed. I thought the story should end there. I had won everything I wanted, and those who betrayed me had paid a bitter price. A thoroughly satisfying turn of events. But I hadn't expected that behind this grudge spanning 2 lifetimes there lay an even deeper secret. And the one who uncovered that secret was my assistant Michael Wong, who handed me an investigative report. A background investigation report on Liam. Ethan, this Liam is not simple. Michael Wong put a thick file folder on my desk, his expression solemn. I'm a little surprised. To me, Liam was nothing more than a man with grand ambitions, but poor skills, selfish and self-centered. There are plenty of people like that in society. What's so remarkable about him? Tell me about it. I lit a cigarette. We checked his background, Michael said, pointing at the file. He's been claiming to the outside world that he's an orphan who finished college on welfare and odd jobs. But in reality, his roots are in Los Angeles. Los Angeles? I raised an eyebrow. Los Angeles Parker family, a name that in my previous life thundered in my ears. They were the business magnates who fought my Oceanwide Group for 20 straight years. Although Oceanwide Group ultimately eked out a narrow victory, it was also left severely weakened. One could say the Parker family was my most formidable opponent in the business world in my last life. Could it be? I quickly opened the file folder and pulled out the documents inside. The first page was Liam's household registration information. Name, Liam Parker. Place of origin, Los Angeles. Father, Thomas Parker. Seeing the 3 words, Thomas Parker, the cigarette but in my hand suddenly burned my fingers. Thomas Parker, chairman of Los Angeles Parker Group. In my previous life, he was my greatest enemy. My breathing instantly grew rapid. A huge conspiracy, like a cold web, slowly unfurled in my mind. Liam is Thomas Parker's illegitimate son. Michael's voice sounded in my ear. He wasn't acknowledged by the Parker family from childhood and was raised in Seattle by his mother. It wasn't until he got into college that the Parker family began secretly funding him. We also found that Liam and Sophia didn't first meet in college. They were high school classmates, and they were already dating during high school. Ethan, look at this. Michael turned to the next page. It was a photocopy of a bank transfer record. This is Sophia's bank statement from her college years. From her freshman year onward, every month there's a fixed sum of $5,000 being transferred into an anonymous account. And we trace the recipient of that account. It's Liam. In other words, during the 3 years Sophia and I were dating, she had been taking the money I gave her to support her white moonlight. And I, like a fool, knew nothing about it. The worst part came next. Ethan, that's not the main point. Michael's expression grew even more grave. We intercepted a recorded call between Liam and his half-brother, Ryan Parker. That recording was made shortly after you and Sophia broke up. Michael pressed play. On the recording, a young, arrogant voice sounded. Ryan. Liam, not bad. That femme fatale trick of yours was pretty well played. I heard that idiot Johnson walked away with nothing and left the company to Sophia. Ryan, don't get cocky. It's not over yet. Liam's voice sounded somewhat restrained. Ethan is calmer than I expected. I keep feeling that something is off. What's wrong with that? Just a fool blinded by love. Dad said once you completely take control of Oceanwide Group, we'll make your identity in the Parker family public and let you return to your ancestors. By then, Oceanwide Group will be the stepping stone for our Parker family to swallow up the Seattle market. Oceanwide swallow. I couldn't hear the rest. My head buzzed, and it felt as if the blood in my body froze instantly. So that's it. So that's how it was. I had always thought that Sophia's coldness and betrayal toward me were because she loved Liam deeply and didn't love me. This was a multiple choice question about love. I lost. I lost to that irreplaceable moonlight in her heart. But only at this moment did I understand that I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. This is not a love story at all. It's a business conspiracy meticulously planned from the start, aimed at me, Ethan Johnson, and my Oceanwide Group. Liam didn't approach Sophia out of love. He came with a mission. He was sent by the Parker family, using love as a weapon to infiltrate my inner circle, corrode my foundations, and ultimately, from both inside and out, devour everything I had. And Sophia? Was she truly deceived? Was she really completely unaware of all this? No. A woman who can enjoy the luxurious life I provide while placidly using my money to support another man for 3 whole years. A woman who can, at our wedding, abandon me without hesitation for true love and destroy my reputation. A woman who, after being reborn, immediately reacts by trying to seize my future business empire. How could she possibly be an innocent, naive, romance-obsessed person? She and Liam, from beginning to end, were in it together. They were not lovers. They were accomplices. In my previous life, those 50 years, the tragic love I thought I suffered, the emotional neglect and psychological torment I endured alone, were all just a play they performed to cover up this earth-shattering conspiracy against me. She did not love me. She was harming me. Her final, in the next life, please let us be together, to me was by no means a confession of regret. That was a declaration of war against me. She was telling me that in her next life, she would still be with Liam, continuing the work they hadn't finished. Completely destroying me. Ethan Johnson. I suddenly slammed my fist down hard on the mahogany desk. The papers and the cup on the desk bounced and were sent crashing to the floor, shattering everywhere. Michael was startled. Ethan, I'm Fina. I lifted my head. My eyes were full of bloodshot veins, but my gaze was unnaturally calm, a terrifying calm. That feeling was like the deathly silence before a storm. 50 years of deception. 50 years of manipulation. I, Ethan Johnson, have lived my whole life and ended up a joke. All my love, all my devotion, all my pain and forbearance were merely a single pawn on someone else's chessboard. Sophia, Liam, the Parker family. Good, very good. Since you want to play, I'll play with you and turn everything upside down. Last life, I only beat you. This lifetime, I will make sure none of you can crawl out of hell. I spent 3 days locked in my office. 3 days later, I came out. When Michael saw me, he could hardly recognize me. I'd lost a layer of flesh. My eye sockets were hollowed, but my whole being radiated an unprecedented sharpness and cold. Ethan, what are you? Michael, gather everyone useful. I need you to do a few things for me. I didn't waste words and dove straight into assigning tasks. First, use Rising Sun Capital's current reputation and influence to lever every bank and financial instrument you can. I want to raise the maximum amount of cash in the shortest possible time. Second, establish a professional financial team and begin, on the secondary market, mercilessly sniping and acquiring Los Angeles Parker Group's outstanding shares regardless of cost. I will, without their awareness, become one of their potential largest shareholders. Third, use every means to collect dirt on the Parker Group, especially on Thomas Parker and his son, everything they have done over the years. Tax evasion, collusion between officials and business people, illegal operations, any evidence that can utterly destroy them, I will obtain it. Michael listened to my plan and drew sharp breath. He knew I wanted revenge, but he hadn't expected my target to be so vast or my methods so ruthless. This is no longer business warfare. This is a fight to the death. Ethan, doing this, we're also dancing on the edge of a knife. If, no spunto, I cut him off. Whether we build an empire on the cliff or crash to pieces with them depends on this one move. There wasn't the slightest hesitation in my eyes. Being reborn once, if it were only to make some money, That would be a terrible insult to the 50 years of humiliation I'd been cheated out of. Michael looked at me and, in the end, nodded heavily. All right, Ethan, I'm with you. Over the next 6 months, the entire Seattle business world witnessed Rising Sun Capital rise like a rocket. Thanks to the huge success of the high-tech zone project, I quickly completed the original accumulation of capital. Then I began to invest and acquire companies like crazy. Internet, biotechnology, new energy. Using memories from my previous life, I precisely rode every trend of the next 20 years. My wealth swelled like a snowball, expanding at an astonishing speed. 1 year later, Rising Sun Capital's scale had already quietly surpassed the peak period of my previous life's ocean-wide group. And I had done all of this extremely low-key. Apart from a few people inside the circle, the outside world's understanding of me and of Rising Sun Capital still remained at the level of a lucky person who got rich through real estate. And the Parker family in Los Angeles had no idea that 1,000 miles away in Seattle, a starving wolf was staring at them intently. They were still mired in the arrogance of their century-old family. Meanwhile, on the other side, I occasionally heard updates about Sophia. She had completely fallen from grace. Because she was placed on the list of dishonest persons, she couldn't find any decent job. To survive, she washed dishes in restaurants, worked as a cashier at supermarkets, and was even seen running a stall under the overpass. The beauty she once took pride in withered quickly under the crushing weight of life. Her father, Robert Taylor, could not bear the fall from the clouds, fell ill and never recovered, and not long after passed away. Her mother, Margaret Taylor, washed her face with tears every day, endlessly muttering that she was a jinx who ruined the whole family. Once, Michael ran into her on the street by chance. She was fighting with people over an apple stall that had been overturned by urban management, her hair disheveled, her body filthy, like a madwoman. When Michael told me this, I had no reaction at all. Pity her misfortune? Anger at her lack of struggle? No. In my heart, there was only indifference. Everything about her was her own choice. What I truly cared about was her missing accomplice, Liam. Michael's men finally found him in a small town in the south. He didn't live the carefree life I imagined, strolling off with the stolen money. He was worse off than Sophia. His leg had been broken. In an underground casino, he survived by serving tea and fetching drinks. The ones who beat him were sent by the Parker family. Because the bankruptcy of Sophia and Liam Decoration not only dashed the Parker family's plan to absorb Oceanwide, but also exposed some shady accounts, causing the Parker family a bit of trouble. Enraged, Thomas Parker took out his anger on this ineffectual and incorrigible illegitimate son. Not only did he cut off all his funding, he also sent people to give him a lesson he would never forget. Now Liam is a worthless ruin abandoned by his family, with nothing left. When I heard the news, I laughed. Retribution came quickly, but I knew this was far from enough. My revenge on the Parker family was only just beginning. The best part is yet to come. 2 years later, Los Angeles, Parker Group headquarters building. A shareholders meeting that will decide the company's future was being carried out tensely. Thomas Parker sat in the chairman's seat, his face so sullen it looked as if it could drip water. These past 2 years, life at Parker Group had been very hard. First, several traditional industries the company depended on inexplicably suffered a Waterloo, and their market share was frantically eaten away by a few suddenly emerging new companies. Then a financial scandal broke out within the company. The stock price plummeted, and market value evaporated by nearly 1/3. To steady the situation, Thomas Parker launched a so-called $100 billion chip project that he claimed would allow the company to take off again. He went all in, pouring most of the company's liquid assets into it. Today, he called a shareholders meeting to persuade the other shareholders to inject more capital and support his chip project. Ladies and gentlemen, I know the company is facing some difficulties right now, but please believe me, as long as our chip project succeeds, Parker Group will usher in an even more glorious tomorrow. Thomas Parker's voice sounded somewhat lacking in confidence. The shareholders below whispered and conferred, discussing among themselves. Obviously, they weren't buying the big picture he was painting. Mr. Parker, it's not that we don't believe you. It's just that this chip project requires too much investment and carries too much risk. Do you see where our company stock price has already fallen to? If we keep burning money like this, we'll all be starving along with you. A major shareholder stood up and said bluntly, "Yeah, with the current panic outside, Everyone says mysterious capital is maliciously shorting us. Do you really have the luxury to pursue these pie-in-the-sky things? I suggest we stop the chip project immediately, shrink our operations, and preserve the company's core business. That's the real priority. Voices of opposition rose one after another. Fine beads of sweat appeared on Thomas Parker's forehead. He hadn't expected that the authority he'd built in the company over decades would be shaken to this degree in just 2 years. Just as the situation was about to spiral out of control, the conference room door was pushed open. A young man in a tailored suit, with an imposing air, walked in surrounded by a group of bodyguards and lawyers. Everyone was stunned. "Who are you? Who let you in?" Thomas Parker's son, Ryan Parker, stood up and snapped. The young man ignored him, walked straight to the conference table, glanced around, and his gaze finally settled on Thomas Parker in the main seat. He smiled, took a document from the lawyer beside him, and gently placed it on the table. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Ethan Johnson, founder of Rising Sun Capital. Starting today, I'm also the largest shareholder of Parker Group." My voice was not loud, but in the silent conference room, it was like a clap of thunder, leaving everyone dizzy and stunned. Thomas Parker sprang up, staring at me intently, the muscles in his face contorted with extreme shock. "Ethan Johnson? The one from Seattle?" "That would be me." I nodded with a smile. "Mr. Parker, long time no see." "Oh, no, we should be meeting for the first time. But your name has been ringing in my ears for 20 years. I deliberately emphasized the 3 words, 20 years. Thomas Parker's body wavered, as if he suddenly understood something. His pupils constricted sharply. Pointing at me, his voice trembling, "It was you. It was you. The one who's been scheming behind the scenes these past 2 years was you." "Scheming? Mr. Parker, you overstated." I pulled out a chair and sat down as if no one else was there. "I merely used some normal business methods to buy a bit of stock from shareholders that they didn't particularly want. As for the troubles your Parker Group ran into, they were purely market behavior. Let's just say Parker Group is old now and can't keep up with the times." My words struck like slaps, harshly smacking Thomas Parker's face. "Impossible. How could you have so much money?" Ryan screamed. He couldn't accept the fact. In his eyes, I was just a bumpkin from Seattle, a pitiable creature toyed with at their mercy. How could he possibly have, in just 2 short years, amassed the power to shake the foundations of Parker Group? Because while you were still indulging in dreams of absorbing me, I looked at him, my gaze icy. I had already reached heights you could not see. "All right, idle talk over. Let's get back to business." I tapped the table, drawing everyone's attention. As the largest shareholder of Parker Group, I now propose we hold a revote on the $100 billion chip project. "I object," Thomas Parker roared. "Opposition invalid." I smiled. According to the company's articles, a shareholder holding more than 30% has a veto right. As it happens, the shares I now hold are 33%. I paused, looked around at the shareholders present who were already stunned, and announced my first decision. I propose that we immediately terminate the $100 billion chip project and conduct a thorough investigation into all cash flows since the project's inception. I suspect someone has been using this project to line their pockets and channel benefits. My gaze, like a sharp sword, pierced straight at Thomas Parker and his son. Their faces went deathly pale in an instant. Because I guessed right. That chip project was nothing more than a front the father and son used to siphon company funds. If it's investigated, problems will definitely be found. You are slandering me," Ryan shouted, sounding fierce but inwardly weak. "Whether it's slander or not, we can find out by investigating." I leaned back in the chair, fingers interlaced, composed. "Also, I propose we remove Chairman Thomas Parker and General Manager Ryan Parker from their positions. As for the reasons, I think, very soon, the Disciplinary Inspection Committee will give everyone a satisfactory answer." After speaking, I took out my phone and made a call. "Mr. Wong? This is Ethan Johnson. I'm making a formal report. Thomas Parker, chairman of Los Angeles Parker Group, is suspected of multiple counts of embezzlement, illegal fundraising, and collusion between officials and businessmen. Yes, the evidence is conclusive. I'll send someone to deliver it to you right away." When I hung up the phone, the entire conference room fell into a deathly silence. Everyone looked at me as if I were insane. Thomas Parker and Ryan had completely collapsed into their chairs, their faces ashen. They knew it was all over. This shareholders' meeting became the funeral of the Parker family dynasty. I didn't look at them again. I turned and walked out of the conference room. Outside the building, the sun was bright. I tilted my head back and let out a long, heavy breath. The hatred spanning 2 lifetimes finally came to an end at this moment. The fate of the Parker family was predictable. With the evidence conclusive, Thomas Parker and his son were shackled and imprisoned, both sentenced to life. Because its backbone had fallen and scandals were exposed, Parker Group's stock collapsed, and in the end my rising sun capital completed the full acquisition and restructuring at a very low price. A once mighty business empire, which once dominated the scene, vanished like smoke. After I finished all of this, I returned to Seattle. The noise and splendor of Los Angeles had nothing to do with me. My true empire was in Seattle. Life seemed to have returned to calm. Until one day, Michael told me that Sophia had come to the building, wanting to see me. She had come many times and was always stopped by the security guards outside. This time, inexplicably, I said, "Let her come up." I saw Sophia again in my penthouse office. She looked more haggard and aged than the last time I saw her. Not even 30, she looked like a 50-year-old Annie. Her hair was streaked with gray, her gaze clouded, and she wore ill-fitting, cheap clothes. She stood awkwardly in front of my huge desk, not even daring to look up at me. "Speak. What do you want with me?" My voice was indifferent, devoid of any emotion. She was silent for a long time. Then in a voice almost like a mosquito, she said, I saw the news. The Parker family. You brought them down." "Yes." I did not deny it. Her body trembled violently, and she suddenly looked up. In those cloudy eyes, for the first time, a genuine fear and despair appeared. "Why? Who are you really?" she asked in a trembling voice. "You're not Ethan. The Ethan from the last life wouldn't be like this. He loved me very much. The Ethan who loved you died 50 years ago in that carefully plotted conspiracy of yours." I looked at her coldly. "You think rebirth gave you a chance to choose again?" "No, it gave me a chance to see the truth, and then to take my revenge." "The truth?" Sophia looked at me in bewilderment. I smiled. "It's time to make her die with full understanding." I threw that report about Liam down in front of her. She picked it up in bewilderment and flipped through it page by page. When she saw Liam's true identity, the call recordings between him and Ryan, and the bank statement showing the transfers she had made to Liam, her expression went from confused to shocked to ashen and finally to a deathly gray. The documents in her hands were scattered all over the floor. She felt completely drained of strength, collapsing limp to the ground. "No, it's not like that. It isn't." She shook her head like a madwoman, tears and snot streaming down her face. "He loves me. Liam, he loves me. He just wanted to prove himself." At this point, she was still deceiving herself. "Love." I stepped up to her, crouched down, pinched her chin, and forced her to look into my eyes. "A man who loves you would, back in high school, collude with his family to turn you into a pawn and scheme against your fiancé? Would a man who loves you feel perfectly justified spending the money you swindled from another man and think it's only fair? Would a man who loves you, when you've fallen apart, take your last lifeline of money and then vanish without a trace? Sophia, you're not stupid, you're just rotten. You crave the rich family dream Liam could give you, yet you can't bear to give up the comfortable life I could provide. You wanted everything, so you bet on both sides and lied to both. It's a pity. You schemed your whole life, only to discover at the end that the love you were most proud of is a joke. The person you look down on most is someone you can never afford to offend. You didn't lose to me. You lost to your own greed and stupidity." I let go of her hand, stood up, and looked at her like I was looking at a pile of trash. My words became the last straw that broke her. She lay on the ground, first sobbing softly, then wailing loudly, crying as if her heart would be torn apart, crying as if her insides were being ripped to shreds. She cried for her completely shattered rich marriage dream, cried for her absurd, laughable life. She cried and laughed like a complete madwoman. I was wrong. I really was wrong. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She tried to climb over and grab my leg, but I kicked her away. I sneered. "Your regret is worthless. To me, right now, you're not even as good as a stranger." I pressed the landline. "Security, come up and drag this crazy woman out." The security guard rushed in, grabbed the still sobbing Sophia, and dragged her out. "Ethan, give me one more chance. I know I was wrong. I love you. I only love you in this life." "Ethan." Her hoarse, Desperate cries faded down the corridor until they were gone. The office fell silent once more. I walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling window and watched the bustling traffic and towering skyscrapers of Seattle outside. This is my empire. I won back my life, and I protected my true dignity. As for Sophia, her so-called love, her so-called regret, were nothing but last struggles at the end of the road. In the 50 years of the previous life, she made me live in hell. In this life, I simply returned that hell to her, and I returned it to everyone who had ever hurt me. No debts between us, fair and reasonable. From then on, there is no longer Sophia Taylor in my life. Only the rising sun and a vast, clear sky.